Um, but this morning, we're going to continue in our series on joy. And when we're talking through joy, we're walking through the book of Philippians, and we're in the last chapter now. We've talked about so many different things in regards to joy, how we have to celebrate the trials of this life because they are opportunities for God to show up and display His power. I mean, let's just be real. How many of us have walked through life and you're walking through a hard time and you're just like, there's no hope. I'm not going to get out of this. That's a terrible way to walk through life. And like Brittany just talked about, these people who don't know peace and don't know Jesus, that's how they walk through. When is this going to end? But when I walk through things with Jesus, when a trial hits, when a hard time hits, I get to get excited and say, all right, God, what do you got this time? What do you got this time? And I can look back on the past and say, God, I've seen you heal me of my neck when I couldn't turn my neck for a month and a half. And now I'm dealing with an injury in my back. And I say, God, I don't know what you're going to do here, but I know what you've done before. And so I look at this trial and I celebrate it. And these are the kinds of things that we've talked about with joy. But over and over again, when Paul's writing in Philippians, he says, rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. And he says it again, beginning in verse 4 of chapter 4 is where we're going to begin today. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. I don't know about you, but as a parent, or if you've ever been a boss of somebody, there are certain things that you have to repeat over and over and over again. Do not hit your brother. Do not hit your brother. Do not hit your brother. Pick up your clothes. Pick up your clothes. Pick up your clothes. Finish the spreadsheet. Finish the spreadsheet. Finish the spreadsheet. Get it done. Do your job. And these are like, how many of you, like, you get sick and tired of repeating something, right? At some point in your life, you've had to repeat something to somebody. And the reality is, why do we repeat things? We repeat them for two very important reasons. One, the listener is forgetting and needs to be reminded. Right? We have to repeat because we know they weren't listening, or they listened and didn't remember, and so we have to remind them. Or two, we repeat things because of who they are. We repeat information to make sure it's taken back. And whenever I introduce myself to somebody and somebody introduces themselves to me, I like to say their name twice. Why? Because I don't like to forget people's names. I mean, I really do not like to forget people's names. It drives me nuts when I forget a name. And so when I introduce myself to somebody new, I ask them their name, and then I will repeat their name 2 or 3 times in the conversation, which, by the way, it sounds really weird when you're talking with somebody and you call them by their first name over and over again. We don't do that in normal conversation. But I repeat it because I don't want to forget, and it's important for me to remember. And so when Paul says this, remember, he's mentioned joy, choosing joy, rejoicing so many times in Philippians, and he says it again, rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. Not when things are good, not when things are going smooth, not when you have plenty in your bank account, not when you have healthy social relationships, not when your family is all together. It says, rejoice in the Lord always. Which means when all of those things are happening as well as their opposites. When you've lost your job and you don't know what your next step is, rejoice in the Lord. When your family seems to be falling apart and there seems to be no hope, rejoice in the Lord. When you're seeming to struggle with your friendships and you feel lonelier than you ever have, rejoice in the Lord. Why? Because no matter the earthly circumstances that we're enduring, our God is still on the throne. He still looks after His children. He takes care of His children. And therefore, we can look to Him and choose joy because of who He is and not what we see. Because of who He is. I don't know about you. Not everybody has great parents to look up to. I had a great mom. I don't even know if she watches my sermons, so I guess she's not a great mom. But she's a great mom. It's funny. This is a real quick funny story. My sister does watch my sermons, and the other week I was talking about something, and she says, "See, Mom, pay attention to Jonathan's sermons." But the reality is, I did have a great mom. And my mom is somebody that I know She has her ups and downs in life, but I know my mom is steadily consistent in her love for me. Like, and when push comes to shove, when my back's against the wall, I know how my mom is going to respond in a certain situation. And when it comes to God, how much more faithful is God than my mom? How much more faithful is God in your life than the people that you look up to the most? One of the things that I've just come to know in this life is that God has been faithful to me in all aspects. I mean, I've lost friendships, and God seemed to bring up new ones that were just so much better for me. When the bank account was negative, God just says, "Hey, here's that check in the mailbox that you weren't expecting." When things were falling apart, our marriage has not come to a point of falling apart, but when things were very healthy, we communicate very well, which is why we haven't hit that point. But when things weren't going well, we've had fights, we've had our bickering, and then things tend to turn as we focus in our minds on Him. And when Paul is writing these things, one of the things we have to understand, our first point of the day, is that joy in the Lord isn't swayed by circumstances, because it's founded in who He is. It's who He is. He's faithful. He's loving. It's who He is. He's not going to go against that ever. And so we can trust in Him and who He is. So rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. He's talking to us. He's talking to these believers in the Philippian church. And then he continues on in verse 5. He says, "Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near." So Paul, he's encouraging the believers to be gentle to everyone. Now when we hear the word gentle, obviously this is a translation. This is coming from the Greek language to what we're reading today. And so we hear gentle and we're like, what does that mean? Whenever I read that word, when I read that word this week, I was like, I don't know what that means. And so I have to go into word studies and figure out what gentle means. What he's basically saying is that when we're dealing with people, we have to be respectful. We have to handle things with tact. We have to be thoughtful to the people that we're communicating with. What does that mean? That means you don't stand on a street corner with saying, "God hates fill in the blank." That doesn't show tact. That doesn't show love. That's not thoughtful. That's not gentle. And that's what Paul's saying. He's like, be gentle in how you communicate with other people. And why? He says, the Lord is near. The Lord is near. But he's not saying the Lord is near in regards to He's with me today. He's saying the Lord is near and that His return is imminent. That's what he's saying. He's not saying the Lord is near in the sense that He's with you as you're walking through this, which he says all the time and is true. But what he's saying in this specific moment is that the Lord's return is imminent. He is going to come back. Now, we read this, and obviously this was written over 1,000 years ago, right? We're talking nearly 2,000 years ago that this was written. And so some of us in this moment look at this and go, well, obviously he wasn't near then. But the reality is when we're thinking in terms of Scripture and when we're thinking in terms of God, we can't think of a time-oriented life. We have to think of eternity. Jesus is just as near today as He was 2,000 years ago to His return, because He doesn't exist in time. He exists, He does exist in time. He created it, right? He's part of it. But He exists in a form of eternity, which we can't comprehend. It's beyond us at this point. Jesus is just as close to our return today as He was then. Jesus could come at any moment. He could come before the sermon is done. He could come before you get home. We don't know. And so when he says, let your gentleness be evident to all, I love this. He's saying, let your gentleness be evident to all because the Lord is near. What he's saying is, listen, the way you carry yourself should make an impact on the world around you so that others can be saved because Jesus is coming back soon. Amen. That's what he's saying. He's saying, your life should, when people see you who aren't in your church, when people who see you are not a part of your life, witness you and see you for who you are they drawn to Jesus? Because if they're not drawn to Jesus, then there's a problem. Because Jesus is coming back soon. And so we have to live in such a way that we're appealing to people. I mean, that's a big deal. And so when when we look towards this, the second point today is, may your joy motivate your gentleness towards others. Understand that we can't be gentle with other people if we're not full of joy. That's right. We can't, if we're not walking around with joy, we're not going to be gentle. We're just going to come across as people who are bitter, who have complaints to usher out to anybody who's willing to listen. Because of what Jesus has done in me, I can be gentle with other people so that they can come to know him. When was the last time that somebody said to you, you know what, you're just so nice, you're just so full of joy that I just got to know what it is about you? When was the last time somebody said that to you? Continues on, he says in verse 6, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present your requests to God, and the peace of God which transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. We just keep building, okay? And I'm getting to a major point here. So he starts with joy. Choose joy, rejoice. Then he says, all right, now be gentle in how you're interacting with other people. And he says, but remember, don't be anxious. Don't be anxious. What we talked about a few weeks ago is that comparison is a joy stealer. When we compare our lives to other people, it steals our joy. And Paul understands that if we're going to choose joy, if we're going to be gentle towards other people, then anxiety can't be a part of our lives. Why? Because if we're walking through life, worried about every little thing, if we're walking through life frustrated and terrified, then we all know what happens when we get anxious, right? Yep. Because anything that goes wrong, or any person who says the wrong thing, when you're full of anxiety, you go off. You either go off in anger or you begin to spew anxiety. And now some of you in the room are looking at other people, and you should look in the mirror first. Because the reality is we all struggle with this, right? Every single one of us struggles with this. Nobody is above anxiety. We all deal with it. Some of us deal with it worse than others, but remember, don't compare yourself. It's a stealer of your joy. Amen. I love Paul. He writes so well. So he says, you know, he encourages the readers and listeners not to be anxious about anything, but instead, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and his peace will transcend all understanding and guard your hearts. How do I know that everybody deals with anxiety? Because when Paul, well, first of all, I'm a pastor, and I talk with you, so I know. And I look at myself in the mirror, and I know. And by the way, and this is a side note, there are seasons in life where anxiety is going to overwhelm you. And then your body begins to kick things into gear which shouldn't be in gear, or it begins to slow things down. If you need to go see a doctor because you can't seem to overcome your anxiety, then please go see a doctor. If you need to see a counselor, go see your counselor. Okay? I believe that God can heal you of depression and anxiety, but I also believe that God has given us doctors and counselors to help us process through our anxiety as well. Okay? Your pastor went through a year where he was really anxious, and there were very obvious and clear reasons for it. And so I had to take anxiety medication for a year. I had to, because it was a season where I just couldn't overcome. And so I went to counseling, I took the medicine, and I don't have to do those things anymore because I got through that season. But if you're in one of those seasons, I encourage you, take the step. Talk to your doctor. And because the reality is, there may be biological issues in your body that need to be dealt with. So that's the side note. But what does he say? He says, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation. Paul gives us an antidote. He gives us the prescription for when we have anxiety. And it's really important to understand this prescription, how we should respond when anxiety comes upon us, because we all struggle with anxiety. He said, present your requests to God in every situation. That means no matter how big, no matter how small, present your requests to God. There is nothing too small and nothing too big for God. And I can't stand when somebody minimizes somebody's problem. Don't ever minimize somebody's problem. If it's a problem for somebody, then it's a problem. I'm getting bent out of shape today. I don't know why. But he says, with thanksgiving. With thanksgiving. And one of the things as I continue to study this and continue to think about it, I was like, I can't speak worry and speak thankfulness at the same time. Because if I'm trying to mask one with, right? I can try to mask worry with thankfulness, but it doesn't work. It just comes out as worry. Have you ever listened to somebody trying to talk a circle around you, and they're saying one thing, but you can read the undertone? Yes. Everything's just great right now. Everything's fine. You don't seem fine. I'm telling you it's fine. Like, you can't speak worry and speak thankfulness at the same time. It's impossible. And so what he says is, hey, with thanksgiving, present your requests, present your petitions to God. And when he says petitions, these are just your needs. Present your needs to God, and his peace will transcend all understanding and guard your hearts. It's a powerful picture. It says, pray and come to God with your requests, and he will give you peace. Paul instructing us to pray, he says, hey, come to it with thankfulness. Now, how do we come to God being thankful when we have anxiety in the present, right? So what we have to do when we have anxiety in the present is we have to step out of the present and look to the past as well as to the future. Because when you have anxiety in the present, then what you have to do is say, well, you know what, God, I've seen you do this in the past. Yes. Maybe in my life, or maybe I've seen this happen for my parent. I've seen this happen for my friend. And because of what God has done, it takes you out of the present anxiety and puts you in a state of thankfulness for what he's done. And now what you do is because of what he's done, now you look, stepping out of the anxiety in the present, you step to the future and you say, God, because of what you've done, I believe that you can and will move in my future. Amen. So we step out of anxiety by looking beyond our present circumstances, and we look to our past ones as well as our future one. Yes. And what is a future one? It's a state of faith, believing that God can and will move. That's faith, believing that he will move. Is this good? Is this good today? All right. So point 3, God transforms your anxiety into peace when we take the step and say, God, I'm thankful for what you've done. I'm thankful for what you will do. I understand that you have this circumstance, and though it bothers me now, I'm not going to let this bother me anymore. Understanding what you've done, understanding what you will do. Let's move forward. Verse 8, it says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. This morning has all been about practical application, and Paul continues when he gives this list of what should be our thought life. Now, it's not an extensive list, it's a descriptive list. It's a descriptive list of the things that we should be thinking about, or how we should be thinking about things. And lists were really important to the readers, because lists were how they did everything. I mean, lists were very common in the culture of the day, and so when he lists this, he's appealing to their culture and those who are reading. But when we look at these specific things, he says to think about what is their totality of what, or understanding of what we're trying to talk about. He says, whatever is true. And when he says true, he's saying, hey, whatever is reality, whatever are the facts. Anybody ever try to play out a scenario in your head even though you don't know the scenario? Or anybody ever, oh man, I hope this has never happened in here. Has anybody ever heard a story from somebody and you believed it before you actually talked to the person it was about? Man, think about things that are true. And when he says true, he's also saying sincere. Like the sincerity behind the things that we're talking about. We shouldn't be thinking about things that not just aren't real, but don't come across as gentle, if that makes sense. He continues on, he says, whatever is noble. If somebody were to get into your thought life, are the things that you're thinking about, are they worthy of respect? Are they of high character? Basically, if somebody were to take your thought life and put it on a screen, would somebody go, you know what, that's cool, that's nice, that's noble, that's respectful? Or if we were to take our thought life and put it on a screen, would we rate it something that somebody shouldn't watch? It says whatever is right. Whatever, when he writes right, he's talking about righteousness. He's talking about God's standard. God's standard. Not your own standard, not a standard that our culture has set, because I don't know if you've noticed, but cultural standards seem to be dropping, but God's standard has remained the same. So we don't get to interpret truth for what we want it to be. We have to interpret truth for what God has made it to be and who He is. And so when He says, hey, think about things that are right, He's saying, hey, think on my standard, think on my level. And then He says, think about things that are pure. They're free from blemish, or they're wholesome. Again, going back to that, are you going to begin piecing stories together on your own, or are you going to actually think on truth? I mean, it's a source of anxiety, right? He just addressed this. What we do is we know one part of the story, and then we let anxiety take us through the whole story rather than letting truth develop as it comes. This is my major problem. My major problem is I get a hint of something, and then I just play out scenarios in my head. Anybody else do this? I mean, you don't have to raise your hands, but you just play out scenarios in your head, and you get from this is truth over here, right? But the more you think about it, you're like, man, this has got to be truth over here. This has got to be the truth of the story, when in reality you only know one snippet, but you've played it out in your head so often and so much that you've made it reality. Don't think like that. Don't think like that. It's going to push you over the edge. He says whatever is lovely. He's talking about spiritual beauty. This is the only time, by the way, this word is used in the New Testament, the entire time, when he says lovely here. Spiritual beauty. I mean, when you're talking about somebody getting healed, that's spiritually beautiful. When you talk about somebody finding freedom, that's spiritually beautiful. So think about things that are admirable. These are things that are commendable. They speak well of the thinker. And then he says excellent, which is a moral excellence. Again, it's that God's standard for our way of life. And then he says praiseworthy, which basically, I mean, is your thought life giving praise to God? Is your thought life, like if somebody were to look, I mean, screen right here, if your thought life was to be put on a screen, would somebody look at it and go, man, that person loves Jesus? Or would they look at that screen and go, okay. And what's encouraging to me is, as we've walked through Philippians over and over again, we've talked about one common theme. It is Jesus who does the work in you. It is Jesus who does the work in you. Jesus is going to transform your mind. Jesus is going to transform your heart. Our efforts and our disciplines come down to the fact that, are we willing to open the Word of God and study the Scriptures to learn about Jesus? Are you willing to spend time in prayer with Jesus? We talk about it all the time. Jeannie Mayo's, one of her most famous quotes is what? Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. If you are spending time with Jesus, I will show you your future. Because you're just going to be more and more like Him. The more time you spend with Jesus, the more you're going to be like Him, just like every other person you hang out with. I'm a person who my vocabulary changes based on the people I'm hanging out with. If you haven't picked up on this, I don't do it on purpose. It's just who I am. I pick up mannerisms that other people use. I pick up vocabulary that other people use. I constantly am just developing based on the people I'm around. How much more then will the God of the universe transform your thought life if you spend time with him? How much more can Jesus do in your life if you're willing to spend time with him? But the reality is we live in a world now where we say, I don't have the time. God, can't I just take a pill? Can't I just speak a prayer? Whoa, I'm getting too close here. Can't I just do the little thing here? And just, no, you got to spend time with me. Yeah. Because I'm going to be the one to change you. I'm going to be the one to transform you. And so when we look at all these scriptures today, he says, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all, because the Lord is near. He says, do not be anxious about anything, but give God thanks. Woo, way too excited. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, present your request to God with thanksgiving. And finally, think on heavenly things. Think above what the cultural standard of this world says. Because I don't know about you, but when I listen to the things of this world, man, they tear me down. I get depressed. I get frustrated when I look at the news. When I listen to the state of things, I'm just like, oh, I'm going to speak it right now. If you follow the NFL, or even if you follow the news, there's a man right now named Antonio Brown, and he's lost his mind. He's lost his mind. And what's scary is that Antonio Brown will post things on his social media like, God's got this. And I'm like, who God are you serving? Not my God. No. No. Why? Because the more I spend time with Jesus, the less I'm going to look like the world. The less I'm going to sound like a whiner. Why? Because as a follower of Jesus, I'm a person who looks to the future, believing in faith that my God's going to come through. So I don't have to complain about my current situation because I know my God has it. So I choose joy. Amen. And all of these things happen because I spend time with Jesus. Can I get the instruments? Let's just get whole worship team up today. I told you I'd be short today, right? Yep. I did a good job. I did a great job. We make these changes in our lives because we're willing to spend time with Jesus. When was the last time you opened your Bible and actually read it? Not to check off a box, but to spend time with Jesus. When was the last time you prayed and it wasn't just before bed because I'm praying before bed, or before a meal because I pray before a meal, right? When was the last time you prayed to just spend time with Jesus? You know, one of the things that's going to change this week is open house prayer that we have on Wednesday night is normally 5:15 to 6:15. With us now starting Wednesday night 7 to 8:15, open house prayer is going to go from 6 to 6:30. And you know, for some of you, you just don't set aside time during the week to spend with Jesus. And that may just be something you have to commit to. To say, I'm going to show up at church at 6 o'clock so that I know I get a half hour with Jesus every week. Some of you can't make it to this building, but you say, you know what, daily I can set aside a certain amount of time where it's not previewing something, it's not in preparation for something, it's just to spend time with Jesus. And these are steps we need to take if we're going to see joy happen in our lives. And I love Paul because after writing all of these things, he says, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. He says, listen, if you follow step 1, 2, 3, 4, if you do this, if you put this into practice, if you spend time with Jesus, if you allow him to change your mind, if you correct your thought life, what you're going to find happening over and over again is that the God of peace will show himself to you, and you will walk around this life and you will look different to the world. You will look different. If you want the peace of God in your life, we need to put these things into practice. We need to spend time with him. Do you need to experience peace today? Do you want to shine like a star in this dark world, no matter the circumstances of your life? Do you want to walk around with an overwhelming sense of joy and peace that cannot be contained, but overflows into every relationship that you have? It's not impossible. It's not impossible. Ed, I love you, and I'm sorry for calling you out. When I think of joy and peace, I look at that man right there. who since I've been here has endured so many different things. And in every situation, he just looks at me and says, Pastor, God's got it. It might not look great, but I trust in him. And I'm just like, that's peace. That's joy. You can have it too. It just means giving your life, surrendering to him, and watching how he takes care of his children. Like I said, this morning was not a normal day, but the word was preached, as it always will be here at Bethel Assembly. We were all challenged. And many Sundays we open the altar, but today's not an altar Sunday, because today's a go and do likewise Sunday. We need to walk out of here, and we may need to change some things. Before you walk out of here, you may need to put in your phone's calendar. I don't know about you, I've been getting more and more meetings, and so I need to keep track of things more and more on my phone, otherwise I forget. Anybody else? No? Okay. Being 30, you just forget things. Everybody 50 and older just starts laughing harder. Some of you need to put in your phones, you need to put in your calendar time that you're setting aside. And that may be your step that you take before you walk out of here today. Some of you may need to decide, where do I need to start reading the Bible? I haven't read it in so long. See me, see Pastor Julie. Start reading in Mark is where I always encourage people. Start Mark because it's just simply Jesus, simple gospel. But church, today, don't forget the words that were spoken to you today. Rejoice in the Lord. Do not be anxious. Be gentle to those around you. And the God of peace will be with you. Not may. The God of peace will be with you. I have some announcements, and then we're going to close in prayer. So next Sunday night, we have trunk or treat planning. So I encourage you to be here at 6 o'clock if you want to be a part of trunk or treat. If you want to help plan, we've planned a lot of things. It's going to be a lot of practical stuff next Sunday night from 6 to 7. We are collecting candy for trunk or treat. By the way, those of you who don't know trunk or treat, October 31st, that's Halloween. Whenever kids are walking around, we as a church, we hand out candy. We set up trunks. So basically, people can decorate your trunk, decorate your car, just as a fun little place for people to look at and have stuff. We serve hot dogs. We serve out food. We have music playing, and it's just an all-around good time. And so that's what we do with trunk or treat. And so that's coming up. There is no women's group this Thursday, but if you are going to the Time Apart Women's Conference, please see Pastor Julie before you, immediately following the service. Please see Pastor Julie if you're going to Time Apart. We'll put you over in this corner. Sound good? All right. And then Wednesday night services begin this Wednesday. Please don't make me the only one here. I'll tell you right now. So our Rangers, again, we're going real practical. Rangers, they're starting with rope craft. So they're going to be doing knots and learning how to tie things, and that'll be awesome for them. Girls Ministries, they're going to be walking through cooking. We still have United Youth on Wednesday nights, and that'll run from 7 to 8:15. All Wednesday nights, 7 to 8:15. Adults, we're going to be walking through the book of Judges, and so we're going to be talking about what it means to live for Jesus surrounded by idolatry. If you look through the book of Judges, it's literally, we live in the book of Judges today, in case you didn't know that. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And that's it. Would you say something or no?
No, we're good.
We're good. All right. Anybody else challenged and encouraged today? That was a good word, right? All right. Let's all stand this morning. Jesus, we are so thankful for your love and your peace and your joy that you give to us. God, your love is something we experience all the time. Your joy and peace is something we get to experience as we grow closer to you, as we spend time with you. God, I pray that every situation we face today begins to fade into the background as we experience your joy and peace more and more. God, I pray that you would be with us this week. God, may we see a good group of people come Wednesday night for Bible study and Rangers and Girls Ministries and youth. God, may you continue to transform us to be more and more like you. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.